with $1 million, you could earn 50% a year. But you have to be in love with the subject. You can't just be in love with the money.
One Warren Buffett quote that is particularly often referenced is about his ability to generate returns north of 50% if he would be managing smaller sums of money. Now, this comment by Buffett was made more than 25 years ago. But luckily, quite recently, just around 1 week ago, he was asked about this statement he made a quarter of a century ago and whether he has changed his view on it today. So in this video, we'll figure out what exactly Buffett had to say today, what you as an individual investor can take away from those statements, and how you as someone who is also managing small sums of money can perform like Warren Buffett in his young days. So without further ado, let's get started. Alright, so clearly Warren Buffett is known for his fabulous track record. He's known as one of, if not the greatest investor of all time. Let me just show you this chart to start this video, which compares the performance of the S&P 500 to the Berkshire Hathaway stock performance ever since that company was taken over by Warren Buffett. And as you can see, the outperformance of Buffett is absolutely spectacular. I've even recently read about a very interesting statistic that went something like, if Berkshire Hathaway would lose 99% of its value, maybe it was 97%, I don't remember the exact figure, the Berkshire Hathaway stock would still end up outperforming the S&P 500, which is a mind-blowing statistic to digest, I guess. But what you have to realize is that Warren Buffett himself was actually performing better than his track record at Berkshire Hathaway when he was way younger. Before he was taking over Berkshire Hathaway and was either running his partnership or even before the partnership days, his track record is absolutely stellar. So let me start by reading the quote from 25 years ago from Buffett to you. This is a comment he made during a Business Week interview in 1999. So here it is. If I was running $1 million today, or 10 million for that matter, I'd be fully invested. Anyone who says that size does not hurt investment performance is selling. The highest rates of return I've ever achieved were in the 1950s. I killed the Dow, meaning the Dow Jones. You ought to see the numbers, but I was investing peanuts then. It's a huge structural advantage not to have a lot of money. I think I could make you 50% a year on $1 million today. No, I know I could. I guarantee that. Okay, wow. So Warren Buffett could literally guarantee that today he would still make 50% a year if he were to manage smaller sums of money. This is what he said in 1999. And do you know why he can almost guarantee it? Well, that's because he pulled it off when he was younger. So it is assumed that he was actually generating returns of 60% before his partnership days, and we actually have a track record of his performance during his partnership days. So let me just show you two tables here. This one shows you that between 1957 and 1968, he was generating a compounded annual return of 31.6%. Not quite 50%, but remember back then he was already managing somewhat larger sums of money. And this chart here shows you his performance compared to the Dow Jones in each given year. And he was actually outperforming the Dow Jones in every single year between 1957 and 1969. So obviously he was doing something right. And back then he also said that he knows half a dozen people who could achieve similar results of 50% a year, assuming they would be managing smaller sums of money. Now, to be fair, I think in this video we also need to acknowledge that there's some criticism surrounding this Buffett comment. Or maybe I should say skepticism, whether Buffett could really achieve a return of 50% in today's environment. And this brings me to the point of this video. Now, luckily, very recently, just last week, Warren Buffett commented on the comment he made way back 25 years ago. He was asked about this particular quote and what he would do if he would be managing smaller sums of money at the most recent Berkshire Hathaway annual shareholder meeting. He was asked about it by this young man that you can see on screen right now. And we've got to thank this young gentleman because Buffett was happy to answer his question. So let's just have a look at Buffett's answer, at least parts of it, and then I'll share some of my thoughts on what Buffett had to say.
Towards the end of 2018, you mentioned that you guarantee you could make a 50% annual return if you had to start again with under $1 million. The question is, if tomorrow you woke up in the body,
Your body.
20-year-old
Yeah,
American,
your body.
what method or methods would you use to achieve that return?
The answer would be, in my particular case, it would be going through the 20,000 pages. If you collected a whole bunch of those, which I set out to do, and actually that's what impressed Charlie when I first met him, because I knew all the details. of all these little companies on the West Coast that he thought I would never have heard of. But I knew about the Los Angeles Athletic Club or whatever it might be. And he thought he was the only one that knew about that. And that became an instant point of connection. So to answer your question, I don't know what the equivalent of Moody's manuals or anything would be now, but I would try and know everything about everything small, and I would find something. And with $1 million, you could earn 50% a year. But you have to be in love with the subject. You can't just be in love with the money. I've had the luck of meeting a lot of people that are unbelievably smart in their own arena and do some unbelievably dumb things in other areas. So all I know is the human brain is complicated, but it does its best when you find out what your brain is really suited for, and then you just pound the hell out of it from that point. And that's what I would be doing if I had a small amount of money and I wanted to make 50% a year.
All right, so what are some of the lessons we can take away from that Buffett clip? Well, clearly, if you now consider that most of us are managing 6 to 7 figure sums, and some are obviously managing smaller figures like 4 to 5 figure sums, what can we take away from Buffett's comments to also achieve returns that beat the market? I think the answer is that we have to think differently, and we have to think differently in many different ways. So first of all, you not only have to think differently than the average market participant that is relatively short-term focused, not focused on company fundamentals, not focused on valuation. Clearly, you want to be long-term focused, value focused. But on top of that, I would argue that you also want to think differently than other value investors, because arguably many value investors, they like to preach the Buffett mantras, but they're not really sticking to what Buffett would do if he were in his or her or in their shoes. And I think the main point where you want to distinguish yourself from the broader masses is to be more demanding. Anyone can buy wonderful businesses, but if you buy wonderful businesses at average prices, you will end up with average results. So I would argue that you do not want to be satisfied with slightly undervalued great companies. No, you want to look for great companies that are incredibly attractively priced due to whatever. Maybe it's a short-term hiccup, maybe it's an industry downtrend that is temporary, of course. There are all sorts of reasons that will make businesses trade at depressed prices for at least a short period of time before the price eventually catches up with the intrinsic value again. And Buffett himself gave the best advice in this little clip. You want to look at quite a lot of companies, at as many companies as you can. You want to go through them very quickly by using a snap judgment approach. That's something I teach in my mentorship program, by the way. And you want to look everywhere. That's your biggest advantage as a small investor. You have no limitations regarding market capitalizations of companies you can look at, regarding industries you are allowed to invest in, regarding geographies. I would argue you are only limited by your circle of competence, which should of course be considered. And Buffett is also very clear about his emphasis on small, meaning small companies that are less well covered by industry analysts and the financial news. Of course, while smaller companies are of course a little more risky because the trajectory of outcomes, the trajectory the business can take is broader than for a mega cap company. These smaller companies also tend to be less efficiently priced, giving you more attractive opportunities and opportunities more frequently. So I would argue that you want to think like Warren Buffett did in his early years, in his 20s and 30s, and not like he's thinking and what he's doing today, now that he's in his 90s. Of course, quite frankly, today Warren Buffett's universe is limited to maybe 50 to 100 names. And in the video clip, Buffett himself said that he, quote unquote, doesn't know what the equivalent of the Moody's manuals would be today. And I can tell you, obviously we are living in amazing times. You can just pull up a stock screener, enter some of the criteria that you want companies to match, and then you go through the list. You look at every single company with, as I said, a snap judgment process, and maybe 1, 2, or maybe 3 companies are interesting enough for you to take a closer look at them. And finally, let me bring up one final aspect. I want to pose the question, do you even want to aim for a return of 50% a year? Of course, I would argue there's no denying that achieving returns of 50% is very ambitious. And arguably for almost everyone, it's impossible. Buffett may be able to pull it off today. I'm quite certain he could pull it off myself too. However, I think you and I, the more average person, will not be able to achieve a return of 50%. And whenever I talk to my clients in my mentorship program about their financial goals, what would be realistic short, mid, and long-term goals for them specifically, I always urge them to be somewhat conservative in their planning. And aiming for returns of 50%, even 30%, I think is not particularly realistic. I mean, I'm just going to show you another chart here showing that the greatest investors of all time, who of course were also managing larger sums of money, but even they were not able to get to a return of 50%. So personally, I would be super happy if I could do 20% for 20 years. And in fact, I would be happy if I could do 1, 2, 3 percentage points more than the S&P over the long term, because over the long term, this slight outperformance will translate into far superior absolute returns. So what I would argue is that outperforming the S&P by 1, 2, maybe 3 percentage points is possible for most people who stick to clear processes, a clear framework, who are able to manage their emotions and who look at a lot of different companies and who, as Buffett highlighted, enjoy the art of investing. If you can do better than that, that's awesome, but I don't think you can count on it and plan your life based on these assumptions. Okay, that's it. Let me know if you have any questions. Let me know what your track record is as of today, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.